Hey, all, welcome to Highly Successful, a podcast that celebrates people who followed their instincts, went against the grain, and found success outside of the traditional 9 to 5. I am your host, Alexander Lafredo Dietrich, and as always, I like to remind you that you can find our episodes on YouTube and Instagram by following us at Oddly Successful. On today's episode, we are interviewing Kevin Moun.
Hello.
And Kevin here is the director of product development at Unison Games. Is also an unhinged nerd and death metal drummer. Yeah, that's awesome. That's sweet. Which is interesting because being an unhinged nerd / death metal drummer, how does that tie into games? Like, those seem like two very separate worlds. Also, I'm gonna put her here.
That's a good question. So there's a lot of crossover between metal culture and high fantasy culture. You're seeing it now, like a lot of the classic melodic death metal bands like Amon Amarth and Sifrim. It's like they're literally wearing leather battle armor on stage. Yeah. And that kind of set a precedent for a bunch of D&D nerds to come in. We're like, wait, there are symphonic elements, but they're grind beats and stuff. So so you have a huge a lot of folks who get into metal because of the high fantasy aspect, and you have a lot of people who get into metal for the Cthulhu-esque. I have problems with Lovecraft. I have many problems with Lovecraft.
Yeah.
But the idea of cosmic horror is also a really big theme in metal. You get sci-fi nerds because of that, and you get people who are into Warhammer 40K shit because of that. So there's actually a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
And there's also a strange correlation between software developers and people who are into early 2000s deathcore.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird.
I wonder why that is. Well, let me ask you, what, as part of how you even got to this video game, the development that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Would you say were you a gamer before you were a metalhead, or were you metalhead before you were a gamer, or were those just two things that kind of coincided throughout your life?
I would say I was a gamer first.
Okay.
Just because literally some of my first memories are booting up Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo as a 3-year-old.
Yeah. I was Street Fighter 2. Yeah.
Yeah. But with that said, I think those early game soundtracks, which are goated, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, obviously Ocarina of Time, and the way, especially Ocarina of Time, where they literally had every sound effect pitched to a key signature within the game. So when you have that da 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 da, that's in key to the actual soundtrack of the game.
That's playing in the background.
Yes.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I didn't know they did that. That's so weird because the Zelda games, just in general, but yeah, Ocarina of Time, everything feels it has this almost fairy element, there's this calming fit even when it's dissonant. Mm-hmm. But that sounds like it's purposeful because if you're going through this, the lava mazes or something like that, and they may be tuned into, I don't know, we'll just say G flat minor or something. Mm-hmm. Then when you crack open that door, it's going to be in some sort of mode or a G flat minor. But if you're on some grassy field or whatever, and it's in A major, they're going to pop it up a half step.
Yep, exactly. So so the soundtracks for my favorite video games were obviously metal informed. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of those early game composers, mostly Japanese, I've realized, are the ones that have influenced me.
Me too.
like were heavily influenced by like 80s hair metal and like fusion, like Matheny kind of stuff. And you'll hear all those sort of like modal key changes and layering in like, I don't know, like Final Fantasy X2. You'll hear it in like the dot hash.
Underrated soundtrack. Oh yes, thank you for throwing that one out.
But you listen to Dot Hack Infection soundtrack. You listen to like New Jabez and what they did with like Samurai Champloo.
Yeah,
it's like there's a lot of like really proggy fusion stuff that's happening. So me as like a 12-year-old going into middle school, and like I had a friend named Matt who was like really into Slayer and like Metallica, and he was like, look at this YouTube video of the like Kirk Hammett like ripping the solo, and I was like, whoa, holy shit. And
that's cool.
And then so and then that's kind of like the classic gateway drug for an early 2000s kid is you listen to Metallica once, and then 5 years later you're suddenly listening to like deathcore where it's just like
yeah, you just want to get harder and harder with it, man. That's crazy. Well, I mean, it's funny that you said, because like I kind of went through a similar vein. Now, for me, it was, I was a gamer first. So as I mentioned before, Street Fighter 2 was where I was at. And then, but the first game that got me into games was Final Fantasy 8. And I know that's divisive for anybody who plays Final Fantasy out there. You either love 8 or you hate it. Well, guess what? I love it. And I have a gun blade in my bedroom. That's my home defense. Probably isn't the best because it's a replica, but whatever. It's big and it's scary looking, so I'm hoping they're like. But yeah, so like 8, right? You have Nobuo Uematsu, and then at the same time, because like I get very, the Final Fantasies were just so story driven. That was their thing, right? And around maybe 2 or 3 years later is when Coheed and Cambria really started hitting the scene like hard. And I got into Coheed because they were a story-driven songwriting. Now, they weren't metal, but they were progressive, right? This is the first time where like I listened to music and I didn't know what was going to come next, and that made me fall in love with it because it was unpredictable. Pretty much how like Final Fantasy was unpredictable. And so that suckered me into music, and I was like, oh, let me get into more proggy stuff, and let me get into more proggy stuff, and then now I'm listening to like Between the Bird and Me, trying to like rip it like Paul Wagner, but yeah, it's crazy because I think a lot of people, they play video games and they may not pay attention to the soundtrack, at least not knowing.
Well, I mean, that's the point though. It's like soundtracks are like tricky because even with stuff like Bayonetta's soundtrack, like I mean, like maximalist, like oh my god, they are like written and produced in a way where it like you're not. It's made in a way where you can like passively experience it, like you're not paying attention to it because like you can't because you're fighting a boss or you're like trying not to die because you're at 1 HP. But it's also interesting in that like if you like listen to the soundtrack by itself, it stands on its own extremely well. And it's like if you can like master that, best soundtracks. So
now like getting back into the game, like how you figured your way through the game, were you did you break into the industry? Because you didn't come from a video game background, right? You didn't go to school. No. Well, I guess you didn't necessarily go to school specifically for games, or like what? Like how did that?
Oh, so you want me to just like
go maybe like if the background, like if school played a part in it, if it didn't, or if there were jobs that you played, or if it was just like So
I'll give you the long short of it. So like I've been drawing since I was like 5. I've always been like a really like multimedia sort of kid. So I've always loved music. I've always loved like art. I've always loved. For me, it was like playing like Super Metroid, but then also like watching Gundam as like a 3-year-old, which is probably not the best thing considering how dark that is. But like I remember like just like having like a 5-star like brand notebook, and like the shittiest pencil imaginable, and like trying to like draw this Gundam.
The erasers that are like hard and smooth, so all I do is just smear graphite all over the paper.
Yes.
Yeah. Good times.
So doing that, and I just kept doing that like throughout elementary and middle school.
Yeah.
And I took art as an elective because I was like, oh, this is fun. Art is fun, and I can just like waste time and like color, and I don't have to deal with stupid math homework. And then like my middle school art teacher in 8th grade was like, what the because like for context at the time I was like doing like pseudo realistic like pen and ink drawings with like cross hatching and all this stuff. So she kind of against my volition I'm really glad she did. It was awesome because I was just like she was like, you need to go to a specialty art magnet program, and I was like, oh, okay. and she was like, you need to sign this paperwork, like bring it to your parents, get it to them. And I was like, okay, and I never did.
Classic artist, just going against the grain.
And she was just like, in hindsight, I think she did go around my back and like wrangled my parents and like got them to sign the thing, and then like
like, Kevin's not doing this. Just figure it out.
And so then I went to a specialty art high school that like I was exposed to musical theater and like dance. Like I love modern dance. Like I'm thoroughly convinced in another lifetime I would have become a dancer or like a gymnast or something. I love dance. So high school was extremely formative for me because like it made me realize that it's okay to kind of be a polymath, where it's like maybe you're not necessarily as specialized at anything, but if you're pretty good at like 2 or 3 or 4 things, that could be really powerful.
And that's what I mean. I hear so much, especially again, I come from a corporate background, right? And so often the advice is don't be a polymath. Pick one thing and get really, really, really good at it. Which, it has its utility, but I'd also argue like there's utility to have somebody who can get everybody to that 80% without having to bounce around to a bunch of people. Who is dangerous and a little bit at everything, because like I think that person is positioned to see a bigger picture. They may not be able to execute on the bigger picture, but they can see it and rally the right people around to execute.
Well, not to make it too much about like turning one's interest into hustles. That's really dangerous too. I think it's important to bring up because we're humans first, we're workers second. Right. Like the idea of like working within a capitalist structure is a very arbitrary thing. And at the end of the day, we're just humans trying to do human things. And like, like it's okay to like be into guitar and to be into art and like to be into all these things, not to get good at them, not to make money off of them, not to do any of that shit, but because you find it interesting and fulfilling. And I think that's so important. And that was like really pivotal for me at the time in high school because like I grew up to like, lower middle income like parents. And it's like they were like, you have to be successful because you came to this country with nothing, and like there's like a
so you had like the immigrant background,
the whole second gen thing, and so in many ways that kind of like flies in the face of that philosophy, and like now that I'm much older, I understand the importance of well, and we'll kind of get into like the irony of being selfish, but so from high school going to college, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm pretty good at art, so let's just go to art college. And I like to describe college as like nothing practical, and it was more of a soul feeding thing.
Yeah.
But and that's where I discovered stuff like game engines and like indie games are a thing. Up to that point, I always my notion of a video game was like very AAA, like Final Fantasy 12 or like more for modern ages, like maybe like Last of Us Part 2, really high budget stuff. But in college I was exposed to like stuff like Undertale and like Stardew Valley, Terraria,
all which are wildly successful games.
Yes, and made by like 3 people. And
interesting.
So like getting exposed to that, but then also getting exposed to like very multi-sensorial experiences like VJing and like
what's a VJ?
So like it's kind of
video disc jockey.
Yeah. So imagine like having like it's not a turntable.
Yeah.
A turntable with like a bunch of LED walls behind you and a projection mapped like screen thing.
Yeah.
And based on what you're mixing or what you're doing, you can dynamically change what's happening.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yes.
What?
And then that is laterally related to something called Screen Dance, which was like an elective that I took in college, where it was a collaboration between the new media arts major that I was or department that I was in, and the VCU dance department. And what we were to do was to take an improvised dance choreography and turn it into a video piece, kind of like a music video.
Yeah.
And like, so the main theming between the VJing and the screen dancing, it is that like, it is about a piece of total artwork. It's not just a visual painting you watch on a wall. It's not just a piece of music that you listen to. It is something that you hear, that you see, that you walk into a space, and maybe you feel the reverberance of the experience. Maybe it's something that you're like tactily touching, and that was like a big lesson for me in terms like that informed games much later now. As like total experiences, because like in games, much like those other mediums, you have to think about graphic design, visual design, interface design, audio design, tactile design. So like, how does it feel to like move a character with your joystick and all of that? And alternatively, if you want to get into AR, VR, like that becomes even more apparent.
I mean, it's, growing up in the 90s, right? There's this weird bridge between the idea of being a kid is to go outside, play, and then you start getting like video games really begin to take off, especially when you have the advent of online multiplayer, right? Because before like the 2000s, online multiplayer wasn't really a thing. You had arcades, right? But it wasn't like Xbox Live, right? Which that was a wild west, y'all. The Xbox. If you ever want to know why millennials are so good at cracking on each other, it's because we had Xbox Live. Like, but yeah, I mean, like, so with that though, we had, most parents didn't want kids spending all their time behind screens, and there's good reason for that, right? You want someone to go out and explore the world, but I think with that, there is also this connotation of games not being an art form, where like you're now combining, as you mentioned, visual, music, tactile, storytelling, like literally any sort of art form that a person can conjure all needs to come together, and video games is like really the only thing out there that pulls all that together into a centralized piece.
Mm-hmm. And while the films industry kind of does that, the big difference is like interactive design in
Right.
games. It's like you can experience stuff in a non-linear way.
Yeah.
And which is like so much harder to design for.
So you're in college and you're now getting exposed to, so pre-college you were exposed to art and you were exposed to music. College seems like the turning point where you're starting to see how all those pieces could theoretically come together in these different mediums.
Yeah.
And then what happened between college to now working in games? Because did you get like a game job coming out of college? Or
no.
Okay, so this was
I mean, like, again, I kind of alluded to it, but I didn't get much practical knowledge.
That's right, yeah.
Out of college.
Yeah.
It like I learned how to be self-expressive.
Okay, yeah.
But that's not the same thing as like, okay, let's, here's a resume, here's how to reach out to employers and all this stuff. Yeah, so the years after college was me reconciling with the idea that, like, I have to make money.
Ain't that the truth?
So I had a childhood friend who, was doing the digital marketing thing,
mm-hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, you just graduated. Like, I've got this thing. You seem really, really smart. Do you want to like hop over here and see if you can do something?"
Yeah.
Originally he had me coming in to do like graphic design.
Okay.
For like, so it was a digital marketing startup.
Yeah.
Managing Google AdWords, AdSense, Google Analytics, Facebook ads, all that stuff. So you need a lot of content for it. So I was brought on to like make the little like graphics for like the home contractor client or whatever.
Yeah.
So two things happened. One, I realized that the threshold for what you need to be good at is extremely low to be able to make money off of it. Right?
Okay.
Because like up to this point, like I thought in order for you to be a legit illustrator or a graphic designer, it's like you have to sit there with like a brush for 40 hours and like render this thing, redraw it, go back to the sketchbook, making like 50 versions, and then like come back and like finish the damn thing.
Yeah.
But like when you're on a deadline of like, oh yeah, this client wants 8 banner ad mock-ups for their roofing services by the end of the week. And that's just one client. You're managing like 6 other clients. So you're like, oh, fuck. And
oh my God, yeah, that's like less than an hour per thing if you're trying to get into a 40-hour week.
And then you kind of are in a situation like that. You're kind of forced to delegate. And mind you, I didn't have anyone to like offload work onto.
Yeah.
Because startups are a nightmare. But in terms of like, well, what resources exist? Stock photography.
Mm-hmm.
You can get preset assets from like, like various marketplaces like ArtStation and stuff like that. And they sell commercial licenses. So that taught me to shift away from being the art maker and more into being the art curator. Where now it's like I kind of have to divest from the idea that I have to do everything my goddamn self, and more of like I'm directing it, even if my hand isn't in it. My form of self-expression comes in how I combine others' work ethically, of course. In a way that makes sense for like the context, for the vision, whatever it is. Yeah.
So you were doing that at the ad agency.
Yes.
So that got you into less of the maker, more the curator. And then what happened after that?
Gotcha. So, I didn't like digital marketing. I got really. It was my first like serious gig.
Paid the bills out of college. Paid
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Sort of thing.
But it was a startup. I
Yeah.
didn't know what I was getting myself into as like a 22-year-old
Yeah.
working 60-hour weeks. I burnt out. It's what happens when you know, you're managing analytics campaigns and, you know, doing a little bit of client management, a little bit of social media management, all that for 8 different clients.
And it's probably not like you probably weren't like, oh, man, when I die, I want digital marketer on my gravestone. Like based on what you're saying, it's like that's not what your purpose was. And so like 60 hours a week doing something that you're not really like, yeah, maybe you could do it for 40 hours, just putting food on the table, whatever. But like 60 hours a week, hard work for something that's not really getting you to where you want to go.
Exactly. And like, I mean, there was a gap where I was like pretty much unemployed for like 6 months because I was so
Coffee.
Oh yeah, please.
Taking a coffee break, yeah.
we can cut that.
Oh no, we're keeping that.
Okay.
Oh no, I'm all out.
But yeah, so it took me like maybe a year and a half to recover from that. So that was like 20. So I worked in the digital marketing startup from 2017 to 2019, and it took me 6 months to recover. And in hindsight, I realized I burnt out, not because I overworked myself, because I'm pulling those hours now.
Yeah.
And it's fine.
Right, well, that's what we like before, but where you're at is like, I'm one awesome game maker. That would be pretty sweet to put on the tombstone.
Yeah. So, like, you know, the reason that I burnt out was because I didn't know it consciously at the time, but like innately, I guess my heart was just like, I'm not living in congruence with what I actually want to do and what I exist on this planet to do.
Yeah.
And you know, like I moved back in with my parents and you know, like worked like really like I worked for the US Census Bureau as a supervisor, which is hilarious. And like freelance graphic design for a little bit, and then the pandemic hit. All the freelance stuff and the contractor stuff. Trying to do this, and that was a really dark period in my life because I was just like, I have like $20 in my bank account. I can barely pay like my student loans. I moved back in with my parents. I have nothing to show for myself except, you know, despite the fact that I like busted ass for 2 years at this digital marketing thing.
Yeah.
And like, when I tell you I hit like bottom, I was like, all right, what's the exit strategy? And at that moment, I was like, oh, fuck this. No, fuck this. I'm turning this ship around, and I'm either going to do that or I'm going to die trying.
Yeah.
So within the week, I was like, so I gave myself a week. I was like, all right, I got to come up with a plan to kind of figure out a new career path.
Yep.
And at the time, user experience design and UI design was kind of like a popular topic within the tech world.
Yep.
And I was like, well, you know, I know, you know, I've dabbled in game engines, I've messed with After Effects, I know hella graphic design, I'm doing that professionally. So this makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's very, you know, game design adjacent because you are thinking about the interaction flows and you are thinking about like all the different actions and paths that a person would take within, you know, a banking app. It's just the stakes are much higher and it's not as entertaining.
Yeah.
So I found a UI UX boot camp. Signed up for it in a week, and during the pandemic, while that was happening, I just I went through the boot camp.
Went crazy.
Yeah, and it was a 5-month program. I graduated a month early because I got hired at Crutchfield.
Nice, yeah.
Because I was completing all of my stuff ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really caring about what grade I got. I cared more about okay, here's the work, here's the portfolio piece. All right, I'm gonna go to LinkedIn, and just
throw it out, put it out there.
Yeah, and also tip too, if you're doing the whole LinkedIn thing, you want to circumvent the algorithm as much as you can. So if you know that you want to apply at a company, don't just send in an application on their website. That's bare minimum. Actually reach out to the folks that are listed on LinkedIn as employees to that company, and just say hey, I'm interested in getting into this. Would you have 30 minutes to talk? I'd love to get any advice that you may have. And you're not necessarily trying to sell them on hiring you, but you're just trying to understand them more.
Yeah, you're not going in there with expectations. It's literally just this genuine curiosity, and then wherever that leads, where it leads.
Exactly.
And would you say, and I'm maybe picking up on a theme, because earlier you mentioned not trying to turn a passion or hobby into something that makes you money, but obviously, as we had also mentioned, you have to make money doing something.
Exactly.
And you're in this position where it's all right, well, now you have a passion, or this passion that you have that you are making money doing it. How were you able to break into that, but still manage I'm not going to have any expectations, but I am there seems to clarify that. What does that look like?
Very painful. So I'm sitting here talking about this I fell. It's no. It's a lot of it is even as I got hired at Crutchfield, doing UI design, there was still very much a delta between where I am and where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it's but I was closer.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a smaller step closer to the thing. And that was very intentional. I was okay, when I was going through the boot camp, I thought to myself, okay, there's no way I'm going to get into the games industry right away. What's kind of adjacent to it, hence the UI UX thing.
Yeah.
And at least that way I can build the soft transferable skills.
Yeah.
And so I did that for 2 years at Crutchfield. Really cushy gig. Sweetest people.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first time I didn't have to be in survival mode.
Yeah.
And I kind of had to undo my own baggage. So I spent a lot of time going to concerts and going to events and exploring myself. And that was sort of the start of an era of where previously at the digital marketing thing, I could just work for 12 hours straight without getting up.
Yeah.
I could just do that.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if my psyche just got too damaged. But after the boot camp, because after that boot camp, I couldn't work more than 8 hours a day. I just cannot.
Yeah. I ran into something similar, when I was in my early mid-20s in college and then working my first job, I always had businesses on the side. I was pulling 12, 14-hour days on regular because just yeah, whatever, man. What else am I going to do? I'm just going. And then I hit 29 or 30. I'm just
yeah.
I just, no. Yeah.
And it's and me going out and doing all these things wasn't me being oh, I need to self-actualize or I need to grow as a person. it was literally just straight up escapism.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, I'm going insane. I'm going to go see this concert because I'm upset. And, you know, and then I just kept doing that.
Yeah.
And then, like, one day I was catching up with a friend of mine who needed their, you know, they wanted to consult me for, like, a website design for their, like, they were releasing some products. And, you know, we ended up not doing anything business, really. We ended up drinking whiskey for, like, 4 hours. But through him, I met a systems architect who happened to be into board games and old school RPGs.
Nice.
And, like, you know, he made a, you know, I told him a little bit of what I did, and showed him some of my music. And, you know, they were like, do you want to work on this game with us? I mean, you do UI, UX, and then you know music. This could be a really good fit. And I was like, sure. And, you know, we were like 6 drinks in at this point. I you know, this is, I was thinking like, oh, you know, yeah, you sure. It's like, it's just like a fun thing. Literally, like 2 weeks later, I get a text and it's like funding secured. And I was like, huh? So, moral of that story is like, go out because you have no idea who you're going to run into. Because, like, that story, by the way, is how Unison Games got started.
You know, so I'm going to make a metaphor here because there's this word, and I might put this in an earlier episode. For a little bit, I was doing like kenjutsu and batojutsu. It's essentially just Japanese sword art, right? And the instructor was saying when you draw and sheath your sword, you're not pulling the sword out of the sheath. The sword stays in place, and you're positioning your body so that the sword can then be removed. And you hold the sword back, and you almost walk into it to resheath it, right? And he's like, it's so important because not only with that, but when you're swinging, you're repositioning your body so that way you can't get struck or you're opening something. It's all about not necessarily swinging the sword, not trying to control the outcome, but controlling where you yourself are physically positioned at. So that way opportunities open. Yeah. And it sounds like what you're kind of getting at in that same moral is like, yeah, I was like, I had music, I had UX, I was doing these things that like I knew was getting me closer. I'm just getting closer. I positioned myself, and then when the opportunity came, I'm just like, yeah, I got everything that you need. Yeah. So, like, in other words, I like to think of opportunity as 50% luck and 50% preparation. And I realized this, like, in hindsight, like, I did not think of opportunity that way, like, before the whole Unison Games thing, but, like, I realized the reason that conversation even happened was because I indulged myself in my interests. Because, like, throughout, like, college and all that stuff, I wrote a ton of music. Like, I have, like, a hard drive of like 70 songs that no one will ever see. Yeah. Because it's not good enough. I have a graveyard of little game projects that I've started. I have, like, a bunch of art that I've made that, again, is just sitting on a hard drive. And in this particular case, I felt comfortable enough with this particular systems architect to just show him, like, hey, this is what I've done. And then, you know, for someone who struggles with imposter syndrome and who doesn't put their work out there a lot, you know, he was like, holy shit. Yeah. Where did you come from? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I've always been here. You just caught me on a good day.
Yeah. And so it's like it is like that. Like I think a lot about like one-hit wonders, or sorry, overnight successes, not one-hit wonders. So like the Rev from Avenged Sevenfold.
Yeah.
He's considered one of the best drummers in all of metal ever. And, you know, they kind of like came out of nowhere. But what people don't know was he was literally homeless and would literally would work on like the same 7 seconds of a drum section in like, I don't know, like Trashed and Scattered, for months. And when they go in to record their albums, he's like, all right, we're going to do this in one take. And he worked his ass so hard that he could just record the entire album on drums in one take.
That's insane.
Yeah. And
it's like 40 minutes to an hour of not screwing up at all.
Yes. And the only way you do that is butt and chair time, and you practice smart and you work hard and you go harder than anyone else. Like that's the only way you can do something like that.
Yeah. So, man, how does that then tie into, you know, there's this other piece that you were alluding to, which is like, you know, you were getting burned out and then learning to, like, okay, I'll put it into something that I struggle with personally. Maybe y'all struggle with this too.
Mm-hmm.
I have this idea of this goal that I want to hit. And I know I want to do X, Y, Z, and I got to knock these things out and do them well within whatever period of time that is. And so it's like, yeah, I'm hustling, I'm going. But on the flip side, right, there's also this, you know, putting yourself out there, which takes this, hey man, you have to stop for a little bit. You have to stop and smell the roses and just see wherever the world's going to take you.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, like, you know, you're obviously working hard, but then you also have to slow down at the same time. Like, how do you balance those things?
Well, for me, I'm still figuring that out, honestly. Okay. But what I found helpful is making commitments.
Okay.
So, like, you know, just messaging your friend, being like, you know, my friend Kennedy, I get like coffee with her like all the time on like a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, you want to like go get coffee on Wednesday at like 3? So then that becomes a forcing function for you to get out of the chair. Because it's like, okay, I don't want to be late because I don't want to hurt my friend's feelings. So I gotta like go at like 2:40.
Yeah.
So little things like that. Making sure, now on the flip side of that, making sure you don't do too many meetings within a day.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah.
Something that I am like really draconian about nowadays, and I learned this the hard way from, you know, because like while I was in college, I used to tour in bands, shitty bands.
More bands than I've toured with, man. These guitars and keyboards have not left this room. Changing that though.
And
that's a commitment to you.
And you know, like I know what it's like to function on 4 hours of sleep for weeks at a time. It's not fun.
Yeah.
So
rough.
After, like, you know, since, you know, college onwards, I've been really draconian about like getting a lot of sleep. And I might not go to sleep early, but you know, if I go to sleep at like 2 a.m., I'll wake up at 10.
You'll get your 8 hours.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that you say that because it's almost like sleep is the most extreme example, right? Which is that's the ultimate slowdown. You're literally not doing anything. You sleep.
Yeah.
But without doing that, like let's say you decide you're only going to sleep for 2 hours one night. Okay, cool. You got 6 extra hours of work in that day. All right. Well, what's the quality of those 6 hours? Probably not as good as it was before. So then let's say the next day you decide to do it again. You still get that extra 6 hours, but you're beginning to get these diminishing returns, right? And so it's almost like, you know, maybe the purpose, a way to, like, for me, I have to think about how does slowing down be productive? right? For like a type A person that I am, like, how do I be productive by being unproductive? Well, it's like, well, how do you want to get the most bang for your buck for everything that you're pouring your heart into? Okay. Take a walk outside.
Yeah.
Get 8 hours of sleep. Eat 3 meals a day. Drink a massive gallon of water, right? Like, have fun from time to time when you're feeling a little miserable behind the chair.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is like I kind of went on like a insano like health like binge during like the digital marketing era.
Yeah.
Because I was so unhappy at that job. I was like, I need something to distract my rabbit brain. And what I latched onto was like healthy eating. So like
some worse addictions, man. Way worse addictions.
And so I like obviously if I go out I'll like have like soda or whatever.
Yeah.
But like at home I don't stock snack foods.
Yep.
I don't stock like pre-packaged goods.
Yeah.
Like everything that I eat is like whole food.
Yeah.
And the only sweetener that I have usually is like stevia or something, or like coffee,
or monk fruit.
Yeah. So I find the combination of sleep and doing that has just been like a game changer, because like, you know, if you ask me to like, you know, get on a 3-hour meeting with like the game studio folks, then spend another 3 hours making some like interface thing with an Unreal Engine, then go on a 2-mile run, then come back, cook lunch, then go out again and meet some friends for coffee, then come back and work on music production stuff for the game, because soundtrack is needing to get done. And do all of that within a 10-hour period without eating, sleeping, or like taking care of myself? No way. No.
Not happen. And especially not over the course of months.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like there's utility, right? And nothing gets it done in a day. So I think there's just an insane amount of discipline and foresight for somebody to be able to hold themselves to that standard. Because at the end of the day, like if you don't take care of your body, like I'm a pretty big fitness dude too. And my philosophy has always been in the context of fitness and work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your job isn't always going to be there for you.
Yep.
It's just not. Like they could cut you at any time if they want. But your body is.
Yep.
Your body is the one thing on this earth that, like, even family, which by the way, I have a great relationship with my family, so this is not like a shot at them, right? But like just theoretically, right? Your family, your friends, your job, money, all these things are for like the one thing that you have in this world that will be there with you until the day that you die is your body.
Yeah.
So one thing that you used to interact with all those people and things that I've mentioned beforehand. So take good care of it, because like if you don't, it doesn't function as well, and then you can't do all those other things as well. It's like the foundation.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's crazy. So what sort of, I know we're already at 50 minutes. Dang. that is going by very, this is awesome. So so you know, you've also mentioned like kind of on some of the things that we had briefly talked on beforehand, this concept of like finding community, you know, valuing whether or not it's good to value process over outcomes, or the other way around. Like, let's start with the community aspect. How's that tied into, I think, some of your philosophy on success?
Well, so I definitely would. I'm a strong believer in that. Like most of my success is because of community, and also like I don't know if I consider myself successful. I just consider myself like closer to what I've wanted to do all along, if that makes sense. I'm not really like too hung up on like money or any of that, but like, anyway.
You're living congruently, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is definitely an aspect of success when a lot of people aren't. You know?
Yeah. It's a privilege. But you know, like the fact that I could move in with my parents, like right after the digital marketing thing was a big deal. And like throughout that period from like 2019 to like just as recently as last year, I like basically moved like every 8 months.
Yeah.
Just because like I, you know, couldn't I couldn't like hold a steady job until Crutchfield. And even then there was so much like back pay that I owed on bills and stuff.
Yeah.
That it was like, cool, I got a paycheck for $2,000 and it's gone. So, you know, I played at my friend, I stayed at my friend Sam's for a bit. I mean, I stayed at your place. And, you know, when you are in a mode of like kind of picking yourself up and trying to figure yourself out and like going back to school and then going to work, it takes a toll on your psyche.
Yeah.
And like, I am thoroughly convinced the only reason I didn't like go absolutely insane was because of my friends. It's like, you know, like you would check in on me, like my friends Tomiko and Akubo would check on me, and like, you know, I would go over to their place every Friday.
Yeah.
And like, you know, especially during company formation for Unison, that was like really stressful. And I was like, okay, I just gotta like make it through the week until Friday for horror movie night with Tomiko and Akubo.
Yeah.
I just gotta
get there.
Exactly. Because, you know, it kind of, everyone loves to quote James Clear. I'm sorry, I'm one of those people. But for me, it's one of my systems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, you don't rise to the heights of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And for me, what keeps me going and what is my safety net are my friends and my community. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. No, I mean, there's a book that I really like, especially for, and I'll bring this up just because the onus of this podcast is one me being laid off for the third time, right? Mm-hmm. And then, well, second time, first person didn't even pay me. So anyway, that's a different story, y'all. Tech. But there's a book that was recommended to me called Never Search Alone, where, you know, the focal point is that, like, find people to whom can look out for you. Now, that book is in the context you can share, like, job searches and things like that. Mm-hmm. But the principle is the same, is because, like, when you have people that, you know, you can converse with and check on you, and they reinforce, like, no, actually, here's all the really cool stuff that you have done, mm-hmm. right? It's so easy. I mean, we're all our worst critics, and especially great artists, mm-hmm. and especially hard workers, right? Like, as you mentioned, you never put any of your stuff out. You're like, it's not good enough, until somebody caught you at a good time and saw your stuff, and you're like, this is awesome, right? And so, you know, we can sit here and critique the hell out of ourselves, even though we're more than good enough. We're not going to help ourselves with that, right? It's going to take somebody else to come along and be like, you're doing all right. You're doing pretty all right. And so to have that constantly is like, yeah, you know, you don't want to live off of other people's praise, but it as the great Uncle Iroh once said, it's always best to believe in yourself, but a little outside help can be a great blessing, or something like that.
Yeah. And something that I want to stress too is like, I mean, talk about a productivity hack if you really want to like think about it this way. I don't recommend thinking about it this way because it's kind of like, but like, you know, doing stuff for other people, you'll be very surprised at how much energy you can draw from your body doing that. Like, I mean, like something as simple as like, helping coordinate like a birthday party, or like, like going out and like getting a secret Santa gift, or if you notice that your friend is kind of like stressed out, you just, like, hey, let's go hiking.
Yeah.
And like what you'll realize, it's like it gives, like, during those moments when you are focused on your own thing, it gives new meaning to that, because now it's no longer about like, oh, it's me. It's like, I need to get this done for me, yes, but then also so that my foundation is stable enough for me to be present for the people I care about.
The people. Yep, that makes sense. And so, how does that tie into then, like, this process versus outcome, right? It seems like you're kind of using that as a hack to like really push you through the process.
Yeah. So, I used to be a very like outcomes oriented person.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm just like, all right, this is gonna suck, but I need to become a UX designer. So, I'm gonna like force myself through this grinder to get there. And I mean, there's a reason I consider that the darkest time in my life.
Yeah.
Like, you can do that, but you're gonna be miserable.
Yeah.
And way less efficient. In hindsight, now that like, I'm doing stuff at Unison and like working with everyone else at that company is way smarter than I am. And like way more skilled and like all the stuff. And, I get to see their techniques and their best practices. And they do a lot within a 2-hour chunk.
Yeah.
And I realize it's because they kind of treat work like going to the movie. And what I mean by that is, they prep and like, get their friends corralled and aligned. They go to the movie theater, they get their snacks and their popcorn, they go to the bathroom, they, like show up 15 minutes before the movie starts, and they eat a little bit of the popcorn and all the food, and they're well fed, well rested. And then the movie comes on.
Yeah.
And they're there.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how, like, I've noticed a lot of folks at Unison work. And that's something I've, like, adopted. And it's like, what used to take me, a 16-hour day takes me, like, 6 now.
Yeah. You set yourself up to be able to work that way and just kind of, like, let your work unfold.
Exactly. So if that's having like an automation script in Windows PowerShell that opens up like 12 apps for you, saving you 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That seems like a small thing, but you do that 100 times. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, over the course of a week, man, you save yourself 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then what can you do with that extra time? Well, you can call up your friend and be like, hey, how's your day going?
Yeah. Dang. Well, okay, so speaking on the friend thing, you had dropped something earlier before, very briefly, where you were like, I want to get on this topic of the irony of being selfish. Talk about friends and stuff,
Yeah.
Seems like there's a lot of community, but you also mentioned the selfish thing. I wanted to see how those two, like, fit together.
Yeah, it's like, so as someone who struggles a lot with self-confidence and a lot of, I tend to people please in a room. I know, a weird statement, knowing that you know me. Anyway, it's like, how do I put this? So for context, I have, I've managed my parents' estate since I was like 14.
Yep.
Right. And I've always had to kind of toe this line of like, I'm being told to like focus on myself and like go to school and all this stuff, but then like being yanked away forcefully to take care of financial matters that no 14-year-old should be, doing. And growing up and watching my parents, no shade on them, by the way, at all. I'm really grateful for what they've done for me. But I saw what happens when you do things purely out of desperation and purely out of getting to the next point of comfort.
Yeah.
Right? Because, they have lived in this country for over 25 years.
Yeah.
And they've done a lot for themselves, but like they didn't really try to pick up new skills or like new forms of education. They've only ever like done what they were already naturally good at. My dad being a mechanic and my mom being a tailor, and that's things that they learned in Cambodia. And the mechanisms of American society change rapidly.
Yeah.
And you kind of need to be adapting constantly to not be like destroyed.
Yeah.
And like I think it is completely valid to have like a very normative like suburban life, and that's completely fine and valid. And there are days where I'm like, man, my life would be less stressful if I just settled down. As they've gotten older, they don't have any savings.
Yeah.
They've had to refinance the house like 3 times. They don't have good like relationships with their friends, because they don't intentionally carve out time on their calendar to interface with other people. Right? So watching that, I realized like, oh no, this is not what you do.
Yeah.
I have to, it'll suck. I'll be tired. I'll be sleep deprived. Whatever. I have to make an effort to go outside. I have to make an effort to keep learning new stuff. Because if I don't, I end up hurting myself in a way where I can no longer interface with my community. I can no longer operate from a place of intention. I can no longer pursue the things that I want to pursue.
Yeah.
And that terrifies me way more than death ever will. Ever. Because, and again, no shade to my parents, I have seen firsthand since I was 5 what it looks like when you live a fucking lie.
Man. That's, we think about the context. Again, maybe you take a job that you don't really like because it pays well. And yeah, it pays well, it gives you financial stability.
Mm-hmm.
But that extra financial stability that maybe somebody doesn't actually need is really payment for lack of mental health stability, lack of utility in your community stability, isolation stability, sense of purpose stability, right? These are things that you can't put on a benefits package, right? It kind of sounds like that's what you're talking about. It's like, I have to carve out time. This is my payment. So maybe I'm like, yeah, I can have this much extra rest, but I'm already got enough rest. And in exchange, by paying this, I can now create this and this and this, all these other. I realize I'm doing a lot of hand motions on a podcast, so now I'm trying to figure out how to articulate. But I'll pay a little bit of rest, like that 2 hours of sleeping that I don't really need, in exchange for more community, in exchange for more mental health for myself in exchange for, which is going to make me more effective. Right?
Yeah. It's like, it's become even more apparent now with like, the recession and like the rate of inflation. It's awesome. I love the world. But it's becoming more and more apparent that the true currency, the currency that only ever truly matters, is time. You can always make more money. You can never make back time.
Yeah.
And obviously, this is not to discount like, like if you're struggling with money, like, yeah, like it is, you got to get that bread. Like, I totally get it. And there's like a whole bunch of like issues with unemployment in this country. But like, it's, how do I describe this? It's, you kind of have to believe in yourself to the point where you ask for more. Because the mechanisms of capitalism are actively trying to get workers to devalue themselves, because they're trying to meet their top line, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to increase net revenue. And what's a way they can do that? They just make sure they don't pay their workers as much.
Yeah.
If they can avoid doing a salary increase that matches inflation every year, that's how many millions of dollars for a company that has 4,000 employees.
Yeah.
Right? So, from a collective scale, at like a national scale or like a global scale, if you have a bunch of, people who respect and believe in themselves enough to be like, hey, I need you to match, to raise my wage at least by inflation.
Yeah.
Because I believe in myself and I bring value to you. If everyone did that, we wouldn't have as many like insane billionaires.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's sort of like what I mean by the irony of selfishness. It's like, by being selfish, you can build competence and capacity. And then through that, you figure out who you are. And then from there, you're able to demand what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're coming at things from a place of stability, you're actually able to interface with other people in a meaningful way.
By being selfish enough to get what you need, you're able to be somebody that others can rely on and lift.
Yes. Yeah.
I like that. That's wild. That's a cool concept, and it goes back to what you were saying. If you can do something for other people, what a way to get there, right? So being like, I'm going to be selfish for other people in a way,
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That said, I know like we're past here. There's a couple more points that we want to hit on though.
Yeah.
One is, you mentioned no hit running life and marrying the intellectual and the sensual, and then I also want to have you share some of the things that you're working on, things like that. So
sure.
Let's start with the no hit running life. What do you mean by that? What's that as far as like
So this is like a thing that I borrow from roguelikes.
What's roguelikes?
So Rogue is like a game from like, I don't. It's really funny. I've played like roguelikes. I haven't played Rogue.
Okay.
But like the idea of like playing a game where if you die, you reset to the start.
Oh.
And it's more about like, player progression is tied to the knowledge that you learn about the game, so that every run that you do, you understand more about the game, and eventually you beat it because you just understand how to get through everything faster and faster and faster. Yeah. So what I mean by no hit running life is, ironically, it means fail a lot.
Yeah.
Like fucking fail. But then on the other side of that, the second point of that is like, live like you could die tomorrow. You could die 5 minutes from now.
Yeah.
And if like, asking yourself like, what would happen or what am I going to do in the next hour if I knew that all I had left to live was the next hour? What would I do?
Mm.
And, like, not to get morbid, but like, at any point, an asteroid could clear the Earth's atmosphere and trigger an extinction event if we as a species don't do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing is guaranteed. Our hearts could just stop for no other reason than like a natural error.
Yeah.
Right? So like, what are you going to do in this moment?
Yeah.
And that's something that I think about a lot.
Mm.
And that's sort of what I mean by no hit running life, because when you put yourself in the situation of like, oh, I don't know if I want to like mix and master and release this song on SoundCloud, which is what I'm running into currently.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of the feedback. I don't think it's good enough. But then when you think about like your own mortality and you're like, you know what? No, that like I'll do this because it's like it's meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Because it's like if the Earth's going to be gone tomorrow, then I might as well enjoy it today. So
that's truth. That's freaking truth. I mean, and who cares if you fail doing something that you love? If like you could be gone 5 minutes from now, you might not have to deal with the sting of failure. You would only have to deal with the sting of failure for 5 minutes, or you deal with the sting of like never freaking trying for eternity.
Yeah. Because like much like the roguelike game, if you don't try again, you don't understand more about the world.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I mean.
Yeah, you just fold in that failure as part of the process. So you accept it before it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you can't just no hit, or in other words, do a perfect route in life without fucking up a bunch.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to, opportunity and, preparing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you also think about like going back to if people are feeling that they haven't lived their life in the way that they're supposed to live. A lot of folks may get sucked into this idea of, it's too late for me. I'm like 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever that is. And, love him or hate him, I like him. Gary Vee mentions a lot about this whole concept of it's never being too late. But I think on a more tangible aspect, it's like, well, if you spent so many years doing something that's not your purpose, congratulations. That's a failure that you learn from. Exactly. It's a failure that you can say like, well, I know that I don't want to do that again. Mm-hmm. I know that's like how easy it is to get sucked into making that sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So if I am to branch out, I know don't dip my toe in that honey pot, right?
Nope.
That's valid. That makes you more effective at running a straighter line.
Yep.
Yeah. And so then with that said, the last bit here is you mentioned marrying the intellectual and the sensual. This sounds more kind of like going back to when you were going to college, maybe being in this game studio. Is that what you meant by like pulling all these items together, or what do you mean by that?
So sometimes, how do I put this? So what I mean by that is like logically, that there are things that you need to do.
Yes.
Right. So like, for example, logically, I can think about all the things that I need to do for Unison, right? Yep. Predominantly being the user interface for the game, and I can like really map out like, okay, here's the design system, here are the buttons and the button states, here's the on hovers, here's like how the animations are going to happen, here how the screen transitions are going to happen, color palette, blah 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 blah. But then, do you ever take a damn moment to think about how does all of this make me feel?
Yeah.
What the fuck's the point of all of this framework?
Yeah.
Right? because like, and this kind of, I want to bring up Google Material UI, their design system that most of the UI UX community loves to quote, and I actually think it is a garbage design system. Yes, and here's why. A really good book on this topic, by the way, is Caps Lock.
Okay.
If you are really interested in how graphic design has been commodified within the context of capitalist structures and how corporations have, for lack of a better word, gutted graphic design and illustrative practices.
Yeah.
Fantastic read. So you have to imagine that corporations want to do things in a way that are efficient.
Yep.
So if you think about like, if you're doing graphic design and making logos, but then you're thinking about like printing them on like millions of shirts,
right,
on like millions of letterheads, that cost adds up.
Yeah.
I understand. That makes sense from a business perspective. However, that doesn't make good art. Right? I think we are currently in an extremely Western-centric era of graphic design and UI design mentalities.
Okay.
Everything is about being like, okay, it's got to be on a grid, got to be A4, it's got to use the DIN thing. All the freaking like gutters have to be like consistent to a T, and it's got to be mobile first, and like uses a limited color palette and has to be like readable as all hell. Which, yes, that is completely valid for functionality first products.
Right.
So if you have a banking app,
that's what you want.
Yeah, it's got to be fucking basic because you don't want to confuse someone who's trying to make a $10,000 transaction.
Yeah.
That goes completely out the damn window when you get into entertainment spaces. Where now the UI is suddenly not just about being functional; it's about being an experience in itself,
supporting the greater unification of all those artistic elements that you talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of having like like a contextual like button menu on the side of the screen in your RPG that you like, is attack, defend, blah, blah, blah. You can make them pictures. You've got a sword, you've got a shield, you've got a boot button for fleeing. Instead of having it like do the basic confirm thing, you could have the entire screen flash blue. Who cares?
Yeah.
And it's like, going back to the sensual thing, it's like, what I mean by sensual is I don't mean sexual.
Yeah.
What I mean is like, what tugs on my heartstrings? What makes me feel a certain way, despite what the world is telling me on how this stuff is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, I don't want to make this like minimalist, like Google informed like thing, because no one's going to do it better than Google anyway.
Yeah, you naturally become a derivative of that work.
Yeah. Exactly. I would just be diet shitty Google. And
now with less calories.
And instead, like, I was like, well, this game is about artificial worlds and, Y2K cool core aesthetics.
Yeah.
And like, that brings me back to my childhood being on Windows XP and like, going to Newgrounds and then accidentally getting a virus. And then you just see like the fucking error windows go ding, 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 ding. Yeah. And I was like, honestly, I want to get the UI to do that. I want to like make the interface like make me feel uncomfortable like XP did, and like how it would like break if like one thing was wrong.
Well, there's a connotation to that, right? There's a kind of, and like in music, I was talking to my friend the other day. They're like, why do like the really high pitched violins sound so eerie? I'm like, well, because they're mimicking the sounds of screams, right? So we, as people, have associated natural, I don't even want to say natural because I'm not sure Windows XP is natural, but environmental happenstances with certain sensual, I don't even want to know how to say. Environmental happenstances, we associate them with certain senses, and in this context, it's like high pitched, right? But what you're saying is like, well, you're doing something that's kind of, it sounds like futuristic, technical, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And everybody in your market who's probably like millennial or older has had that instance where it's just like that pops up, and there's just like there's something wrong when you see more than one box stacked on top of each other. Like, something is wrong here. And that's like what you want. You're like, hey, how do we show the user something's wrong? Well, we could be like, hey, something's wrong. All right, well, that was easy to get through. It's like, no, critical, holy crap. And everybody's just like, yeah, it's not the Windows XP thing, but it's that stacking boxes. It's just like things are overloading, vision's crowded, just like,
yeah. So another way of thinking about it is like, because I'm also like a death metal drummer. It's like, I think to be a good drummer, you have to be good at dancing. You can't have it either. Like drumming and dancing are like going back to the earliest stages of civilization. They've always been intertwined.
Yeah.
Whenever there's rhythm, there's dancing and there's folk song.
Yeah.
Right? And like, if you're going to sit there and like hold a beat, it could be a 2-step or like a double bass run or like a Slayer beat or whatever, or it could be like, a bonobo dance beat.
Yeah.
Like you can't just sit there and be like, bah, do, bah. It's like you have to like boom, do, bah. It's like you can't
get that tension, that release. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that you have to let yourself feel it and to like be sensual with it and have that sensory experience. And like, like with the game UI, like my co-founder Blaze, like, he pointed out like, dude, you have homework every day. And that is to play a fucking video game.
Yeah.
For at least an hour a day. And I was like, all right, cool. I can do that.
Yeah.
And, because creativity, it's not this thing where it's like you force it to happen. It's like creativity is just a natural outcome of the things that you've lived.
Yeah.
And like, how can you, in my case, make a game UI or make music if I don't play games or if I don't make or don't listen to music?
Yeah.
So, and that's sort of like what I mean. And yeah, I'm like,
but very the intellectual and essential.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I know we're approaching the end here. There's a couple things you wanted to highlight. Well, first of all, where can people find out more about like Unison and this game that you're going to be launching in the future?
So you could follow us on Instagram at Unison Games HQ.
Okay.
UNISON Games HQ.
Cool.
Awesome. You can follow me at Blast Beat Demon.
Nice.
On Instagram.
I love that. See some awesome drum videos too. Cool. So they can follow Unison both on Instagram. You at Blast Beat Demon. The game studio at Unison Games HQ.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. I've got a few other things in the works, but I'll talk about those later.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And thank you, everybody who has showed up for this episode of Oddly Successful. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review, because who knows that there's somebody out there who wants to slam some drums, drink whiskey, and start their own shindig. No, right? But they won't know about it unless this podcast gets out to more people. So by leaving us a review, you allow this podcast to get spread by the greater algorithms that be. Plus, we get good feedback, and always trying to make this a a better experience for y'all. So with that said, thank you again for listening. And until next time, folks, stay